The glowing rectangle resting on the kitchen counter felt like a tombstone. It wasn't the content of the text that shattered the decade we had built, but the sheer, cowardly finality of the sender. It read simply, "Mom is right. The move is too risky for the family right now. We need to stay where we are." I didn't need to ask who the family referred to. It certainly wasn't me, and it wasn't the daughter we shared. It was the two of them, Ethan and Eleanor, his mother, the eternal, unbreakable unit, and I was just the tenant who had paid too much rent for too long. We had spent 6 excruciating months planning this move, poring over floor plans for a house 800 miles away, a clean slate, a necessary escape from the suffocating gravitational pull of his childhood home. I'd seen the exhaustion in Ethan's eyes, the yearning for independence that occasionally flared up, usually after his mother had micromanaged our vacation schedule or replaced my organic groceries with her own highly processed, better value choices. He'd promised me this house was our future, a line drawn in the sand. He swore he was ready to prioritize our nuclear family. Yet here was the ultimate veto, delivered not by a screaming match, not by an honest confession of fear, but by a limp, 4-line text message that delegated the blame and surrendered our freedom. The cruelty wasn't the decision itself. I knew Eleanor would fight tooth and nail. The cruelty was Ethan's profound inability to stand as my partner, to acknowledge that the woman he married deserved more than to be eternally ranked second to the woman who raised him. I picked up my phone, the screen still illuminated by his surrender, and started typing a response that would erase 10 years of false promises. This wasn't just about a house. It was about the fundamental truth that he had chosen his mother over me, over our marriage, over the possibility of my happiness, one final, agonizing time. Looking back, I realized the red flags hadn't been flags at all. They were giant, waving banners I had willfully ignored, mistaking them for charming devotion. When we first met, Ethan's closeness with his mother seemed endearing. He called her every day, consulted her on minor life decisions, and always made sure she was comfortable. I told myself, he's a good man, he values family. I didn't understand that valuing family meant valuing only his original family, and that I was merely an annex, a temporary addition to the main building. Our engagement party was the first serious tremor. Eleanor took over every detail, from the guest list to my dress alterations, subtly shifting the focus from celebrating us to celebrating her son. When I gently suggested a different color scheme, Ethan pulled me aside, his voice strained. "Please, Clara, it's just easier to let her have this. It means so much to her." That phrase, "it's just easier," became the mantra of our marriage, a constant shield behind which Ethan hid his fear of disappointing his mother. The triangulation was immediate and persistent. If I cooked chicken, Eleanor would bring over her pot roast the next day, commenting sweetly, "Oh, honey, I know you try, but Ethan just needs his mother's cooking sometimes, doesn't he, sweetie?" It was never aggressive, it was corrosive. It was a constant, gentle undermining of my role, my choices, and my identity as the woman of his house. Our fights were never about money or infidelity. They were about boundaries that Ethan refused to build. He saw my pleas for independence as a tax on his mother, translating my pain into selfish demands. I remember asking him why he married me if he only ever wanted his mother's approval, and he looked genuinely confused, as if the two were mutually exclusive. He thought he could have both, but Eleanor had already ensured that in the zero-sum game of his affection, I was mathematically doomed to lose. The situation metastasized when Eleanor suffered a minor fall 4 years into our marriage. It wasn't serious, but she leveraged the fragility of her health into a full-scale emotional siege. She insisted on moving into the empty guest suite in our house, just until I'm fully recovered. That temporary arrangement became permanent. Suddenly, our house wasn't ours anymore. My mornings started with Eleanor standing over the stove, commenting on the lack of nutrients in the breakfast I was making for our daughter, Lily. My evenings ended with her sitting in our living room, loudly watching TV, effectively preventing Ethan and I from having any private, intimate time, physical or conversational. Ethan was thrilled, convinced he was the most dutiful son in the world. He basked in her dependency, interpreting her neediness as love. The worst offense was the subtle invasion of my professional life. I am a freelance editor, working from home, and Eleanor began treating my office like a public space. She would wander in unannounced to ask where the remote was, or loudly talk on the phone about her medical appointments, shattering my focus. When I complained to Ethan, his response was the standard defensive shrug. "She's old, Clara. She just misses having people around. Can't you just close the door?" But closing the door was a guaranteed tantrum from Eleanor. A sudden, dramatic headache or a declaration that she felt unwelcome. The control was not exerted through force, but through guilt and emotional manipulation, tactics Ethan was completely defenseless against. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching my life being carefully dismantled, piece by piece, by a woman who saw me as an obstacle to her son's attention. Every day was a test of how much I could tolerate before I completely disappeared. The final years leading up to the text message were marked by a cold, desperate exhaustion. I stopped fighting the small battles, realizing they were meaningless when the war was already lost. I let Eleanor choose Lily's summer camp. I nodded when she reorganized my pantry, again, and I made excuses for Ethan when he would habitually cancel our date nights because his mother needed him to fix a leaky faucet she could have easily called a plumber for. This surrender was not peace. It was the slow, deliberate burial of my identity. I started channeling my frustration into meticulous planning. The idea of the move started small, a daydream, a whisper of hope. We weren't just moving states, we were moving to where my sister lived, a place where I would have an actual support network that wasn't actively trying to sabotage my marriage. I pitched the idea to Ethan not as an escape, but as a career opportunity for him. He reluctantly agreed, the prospect of a promotion finally outweighing his fear of disappointing Eleanor. The moment he agreed, a switch flipped in me. I became ruthless in my execution. I contacted realtors, started vetting schools, and created detailed budgets. Ethan followed along like a weary child, simultaneously excited by the freedom and terrified by the looming confrontation with his mother. Eleanor, of course, sensed the threat immediately. The house hunting was conducted in secret, but once the offer was accepted on the new property, a beautiful, sun-filled place with a dedicated office for me, I knew the clock was ticking. She started exhibiting psychosomatic symptoms, chest pains, sudden dizzy spells, all timed perfectly to coincide with moments when Ethan was on the phone with the mortgage lender. She weaponized her frailty, demanding his attention, painting herself as the victim abandoned by her cruel daughter-in-law. I watched Ethan waver, his spine melting under the weight of her manufactured crisis, and I knew, deep down, that the perfect house 800 miles away might as well have been on the moon. We needed Ethan's signature on the final closing documents by the end of the week. That Tuesday, the tension in the house was palpable, thick and poisonous. Eleanor was confined to bed, dramatically sipping soup, occasionally letting out soft, heartbreaking moans that sounded suspiciously like they were rehearsed. Ethan was bouncing between her room and the kitchen, avoiding my gaze, clutching the manila envelope containing our future. That evening, I laid it all out for him, calmly, without raising my voice. "Ethan, this is the last decision we make together as husband and wife. Either we sign those papers and start a life where we are partners, making our own choices, or you choose to stay here, sacrificing our independence for your mother's comfort. There is no middle ground left. I watched the internal battle on his face. He loved me in his own fundamentally compromised way. He loved Lily. But he was addicted to the validation he received from being Eleanor's good boy. He took the papers, promised to review them, and retreated to his home office, which was, ironically, the room adjacent to his mother's bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. I listened to the muffled, low murmur of voices, the occasional sharp intake of breath, knowing that the ultimate counseling session was happening, and the judge, jury, and executioner was Eleanor. My entire future, the decade of my investment, was being decided by a conversation I was excluded from. I finally understood that the real betrayal wasn't the interference, it was the willing submission. This begs the question for anyone who has experienced this triangulation. Where is the line where a spouse's continued loyalty to an interfering parent ceases to be dutiful and crosses into active, conscious betrayal of their marriage vows? Share your thoughts below. Wednesday morning arrived cold and silent. Ethan was gone before I woke up, leaving a note saying he had an early meeting and would handle the papers later. It was a flimsy excuse, a transparent attempt to buy more time and avoid the intensity of my gaze. The manila envelope was gone from the desk. I forced myself to go through the motions, getting Lily ready for school, making coffee, acting normal for Eleanor, who had suddenly made a miraculous recovery and was cheerfully watering the window box. She looked triumphant, a cat that had successfully played with its mouse. The absence of the signed contract was screamingly loud. I tracked Ethan's location, realizing he hadn't gone to work at all. He was at his mother's lawyer's office, handling some vague trust issues that Eleanor insisted needed immediate attention. I knew what was happening. Eleanor wasn't just convincing him. She was probably finding a financial mechanism, a way to entangle their money so inextricably that moving would become financially catastrophic for Ethan, effectively chaining him to the area. I didn't call him. I didn't send frantic texts. I waited, suspended in a terrible, cold clarity. I realized that my previous 6 months of hopeful planning had been nothing more than a desperate attempt to resurrect a corpse. The marriage died years ago, smothered by the perpetual presence of a third party. The move was merely the defibrillator test, and the flat line confirmed the death. The waiting was the final stage of grief, the slow acceptance that the man I married didn't exist. He was merely an extension of his mother, a life-sized puppet whose strings led straight back to Eleanor's manipulative hand. By the time 4 p.m. rolled around and Lily was due home, I felt nothing but a deep, terrifying emptiness, knowing that my husband's choice was probably already finalized, sealed, and delivered, just waiting for the text message notification to confirm the inevitable. The sound of the text notification wasn't even a chime. It was a soft, almost imperceptible ping from the phone I'd left charging in the bedroom. I was folding laundry, standing in the very room that was supposed to be our master bedroom in the new house, the place where we would finally reclaim our intimacy and peace. I walked to the nightstand, my movements slow, heavy, like wading through deep water. The message was from Ethan, sent 5 minutes earlier. It wasn't the one from the hook. That one was the summary of the shock. The full text, the one that ended everything, was far worse because of its rationalization. It started, "Clara, I know this is hard, but I spent all morning talking with Mom and Mr. Harrison, her lawyer. The financial penalties for breaking the trust fund now are substantial, and Mom's health is just not stable enough for the stress of selling this house." He continued, the words blurring into a bureaucratic excuse for emotional cowardice. She also brought up some very real concerns about the new city and Lily's stability. It's not fair to uproot her for a risk. I think we need to postpone the move indefinitely and refocus here. I know you're upset, but this is the responsible decision for the whole family. The key words stabbed me. Mom and Mr. Harrison. Not I think, or we decided. He had outsourced the decision to his mother and her attorney, framing the destruction of our marriage as a financially responsible choice. The whole family meant everyone except the woman he pledged to cherish. It was the absolute, final confirmation that I had been fighting a ghost. There was no man to stand up for me. There was only a scared little boy prioritizing the comfort of his matriarch and the security of her bank account. I didn't reply. I didn't feel rage. I felt an icy, surgical clarity. The decision wasn't about the house, the money, or the risk. It was about his profound refusal to cut the umbilical cord. I walked straight to the hall closet, pulled out the suitcase I used for business trips, and began filling it with my clothes. I knew I couldn't spend another night under the roof he shared with his mother. The methodical precision of my packing felt strangely liberating. I wasn't running. I was executing a long overdue evacuation. I packed only my essentials, the clothes I needed, my passport, my work laptop, and a few precious photographs. I made no attempt to hide the activity. If Eleanor or Ethan had walked in, they would have seen the open suitcase, the evidence of irreversible departure. I considered writing a long vitriolic letter detailing every failure, every moment of triangulation, but I realized words were useless. Ethan understood. He just didn't care enough to choose differently. Instead, I left him a note on the kitchen island, brief and completely devoid of emotion. I received your text. I understand your choice. Since you have prioritized your mother and her financial structure over the future of our marriage, I have made my own choice. I am leaving tonight. Lily stays with my sister starting tomorrow. We will handle the legal and custody arrangements through my attorney. Don't call me. Clara. It felt like signing divorce papers years ahead of time. The pain was still a vast, cold weight in my chest, but it was overshadowed by the exhilarating rush of finally choosing myself. For a decade, I had lived to serve the uneasy truce between mother and son. Now I was serving my own necessity for self-preservation. I arranged for Lily to spend the night with a friend whose mother was a confidante of mine. I couldn't bear to witness the confrontation, nor did I want Lily to see the final, heartbreaking collapse of her parents' life together. I needed clean air, a clean break, and the stark physical distance of 800 miles as fast as humanly possible. I called a ride-share service, my voice steady as I gave the airport address. I looked around the house one last time, not with nostalgia, but with the profound pity one reserves for a prison cell that has finally unlocked its doors. Ethan arrived home just as the car was pulling up, his face etched with confusion and sudden panic when he saw the suitcase standing by the front door. He walked in, dropping his briefcase with a heavy thud, his eyes darting from my calm, unyielding expression to the note on the counter. He read it, his face draining of color. Clara, what is this? Don't be dramatic. We can talk this through. We just need time to figure out the finances. He sounded desperate, but not truly remorseful. He was desperate because his life structure was crumbling, not because my heart was broken. I stopped him before he could launch into his usual round of excuses. There is nothing to talk through, Ethan. You made your choice. The financial penalty you were so afraid of paying was the one that would have bought us our freedom. Instead, you chose to pay the penalty of losing your wife and the stability of your family, all so you wouldn't upset your mother. I didn't raise my voice. The control was my power. You chose a text message over a conversation. You chose Eleanor's approval over my entire existence. You have spent 10 years building a life that accommodates her every whim. And I was foolish enough to think I could break that bond. Tonight, you confirmed that bond is unbreakable. You are tethered to her, financially and emotionally. I deserve a partner, Ethan, not a little boy who needs constant permission to live his own life. He tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back, the movement deliberate and final. I am not staying here to be your second-class spouse, always vying for attention with a woman who actively hates me. You didn't just choose your mother over me, Ethan. You chose a lifetime of stagnant, controlled misery over the possibility of genuine, adult happiness. And I am choosing my own peace. The rideshare driver honked softly. It was my signal. I picked up the suitcase, and I walked out the door, leaving behind the man who had traded his marriage for his mother's apron strings. The journey was a blur of silence and reflection. By the time I landed and my sister Sarah wrapped me in a fierce, protective hug, the pain had begun to solidify into resolve. The decade wasn't wasted. It was a lesson, albeit an expensive one, in recognizing where true loyalty lies and understanding the difference between devotion and crippling dependency. Ethan had shown me, in the most painful way possible, that he valued comfort and the familiar approval of his mother more than the difficult, demanding work of a true partnership. My heart ached for the life Lily would now navigate, but I knew she would be safer, healthier, and happier with two parents who were finally honest about their separation than she ever was in the tense, suffocating environment we had created with Eleanor. I had lost a husband and a home, but I had gained my autonomy and my future. I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, 800 miles away from the shadow of the woman who sought to erase me. The text message had ended the marriage, but in doing so, it had started my life. It was a brutal liberation, but liberation nonetheless. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this, please subscribe to the channel Femme Fatale Files, leave a like, and write in the comments which country you are from. Stay tuned, there will be a new story tomorrow.